I'm Pastor Tom, and welcome to the Sunday Sermon.
You got to move. You gotta move. You got to move. You got to move. You got to move, child. You got to move. You gotta move. 'Cause when the Lord gets ready.
All right, I'm going to read to you from the book of Genesis, the 34th chapter. I'm actually going to just read the whole chapter to you. Here's the setting. Jacob and his family, after meeting Esau, make it safely into the land of Canaan. And they're near a city called Shechem. And so Jacob buys a piece of property, sets the encampment there. And so they're not too far. It's a place called Padan Aram. It's not very far from the city of Shechem. The king of Shechem is named Hamor. He's got obviously a bunch of sons, but the heir apparent is a guy named Shechem, named like the city. And so they're living there back in Canaan, and this is where Jacob grew up. Leah's daughter, Dinah, went out to visit the women who lived in the area. And Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, Shechem, the prince of the land, he saw her. And so he took her and raped her. He was deeply attracted to Dinah, Jacob's daughter, and he loved her. And he spoke tenderly to her. So Shechem went to his father and Hamor and said, "Get me this young girl for a wife." Jacob heard that Dinah had been raped by Shechem. But he kept silent, and his sons were away, so he said nothing, thinking to wait until they returned. In the meantime, Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob in order to speak with him, to negotiate with him. Now, it was about this time that Jacob's sons came in from the field and heard about what happened, and they were angry. They were outraged. They felt disgraced. For such a thing ought not to be done in Israel. Hamor was speaking with them. He was saying, "The soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him in marriage. Then intermarry with us. Give us your daughters. Take our daughters for yourselves, and thus you shall live with us. The land shall be open before you. You can live and make money and acquire property." And Shechem also was there and said to Jacob and to Dinah's brothers, "If I find favor in your sight, I will give you whatever you ask. Ask whatever you want for the bride price. I will give it according to what you say. Just let me marry her." Jacob's sons answered Shechem and his father Hamor with deceit on account of what had happened. They said, "Oh, we cannot do this thing. We can't give our sister to one who is uncircumcised. That would be disgraceful for us. So we have a condition, and then we will consent. If you will become like us in this way, that every male among you be circumcised, then we will give you our daughters, we will take your daughters for ourselves, and we will live with you. We'll become one people. If you will not do this, however, if you will not be circumcised, then we will pack up and leave." Now this seemed reasonable to Hamor and Shechem, and so they did not delay to take care of this. And because Shechem was delighted with Jacob's daughter, and he was held in high esteem among the household, so they went to Shechem to the gate of the city, and they informed everybody in the city, saying, these men are friends, maybe allies with us. So let them live in the land and trade in it, and behold, the land is big enough for them and for us, and let us take their daughters in marriage and give our daughters to them. And here's the only condition that will have to happen before they consent to this. For us to become one people, every male among us has to be circumcised, just as they are. But will not their livestock and property and all their animals be ours? So let us consent to this. Let them live with us. And so everyone who heard this message listened to Hamor and listened to Shechem, and so every male was circumcised, everyone who went in and out of the gate of the city. Now it came about on the third day, when they were in pain, two of Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, these were Dinah's brother in that they shared the same mother. They took their swords. They came upon the city unawares, and they killed every single male. Hamor, Shechem, with the edge of the sword. And they took Dinah, who was in Shechem's house, and they left. And then the rest of Jacob's sons came upon the slain and looted the city because their sister had been raped. And they took their flocks, their herds, the donkeys, everything which was in the city, and they captured and looted all the wealth, all their little children, all their wives, even everything that was in their house. And Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "Why have you brought this trouble on me? You have made me odious among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites and the Perizzites. And us being few in number, they will gather together and attack me. They'll attack me, and I'll be destroyed in my household." And they answered, "Why should we let them treat our sister like a harlot?" A law in the Old Testament. It's in the book of Deuteronomy in the 22nd chapter. And, a lot of times when I read the laws in the Old Testament, I'm like, what? But this one in particular gets a what out of me, because the law says this: if a man comes upon a virgin who is not engaged to be married, and he rapes her, then he must marry her. He must pay 50 shekels of silver to her father, and he cannot ever divorce her. And my reaction to that is, what? Let's make the victims of rape marry their rapists? Is that insane or what? It did not make any sense to me. I've never understood this. And I'm sort of like, God, you do know, right, Lord, that rape is wrong, right? I don't have to explain that to you. You understand that, correct? What are we talking about here? This always bothered me. And one day I just happened to hear something. It was a reference to something that was going on in the 20th century. So in a lot of cultures, the marrying a young girl who is a virgin, was considered highly valuable for a pretty simple reason. Because then if she got pregnant, you'd know who the father was, right? Because they didn't have genetic studies back then. So how do you know who dad is? Well, you guard access to women so that they can only get pregnant by the person who's properly designated, i.e. a husband, and that way you know who their lineage is. And in a culture that's very caught up in understanding itself in relationship to the founding patriarch, or to, like Abraham in the case of the Israelites, or to an eponymous ancestor like Israel, Jacob, who's also known as Israel, it becomes really important to be able to show the descendancy, the lineages. That's why there's so many genealogies in the scriptures, because this is a big deal for them. For us, it's like, don't you skip the genealogies? I generally do. But no, it's incredibly important, so they keep track of that. So a lot of the laws around human sexuality you find in the Old Testament in particular are, when you kind of dig down to them, they're not really what we would consider moral laws. They're really about just making sure you know who dad is, controlling that access to women. But what I heard was that there was an area kind of in the Middle East. I think it might have been a little south down in Africa, but it was in that kind of that range of the world. And there was a practice that some men were doing, where they would see a woman who they would like to marry, and they would rape her as a way of like dibsing her. And then they would go, and when they would go to negotiate with the family the bride price and everything, because a marriage is a financial transaction in the ancient world, and in some places even today, they would say, well, she's damaged goods now, so I need a discount. So it's like, oh my goodness, what a crazy behavior. Well, apparently, back in the area of Canaan, in the land of Canaan, this was a practice that was kind of out there. I think of it as being like the hillbillies, not the townies, not the folks in the sort of center of the world, but there were folks living up in the hills, and that they had these kind of odd practices, these kind of bad ways of doing things. Now, the guy who was the founder of Buddhism, called the Buddha, his name was Gautama. He is apparently said, don't talk to someone unless they're willing to listen. Right? Doesn't it seem like a fairly good piece of advice? Kind of obvious, but it's a good piece of advice. But he was saying, people have to be ready before they can hear a message. People aren't always ready to hear what needs to be said to them. And so if I think about it that way, I look and I see this law in the Old Testament, and I realize these are people who've got an entrenched cultural practice. And if God said to them, hey, rape is wrong, they wouldn't be able to hear it, because we've always done it that way. Isn't that, like the last words of a dying church? There are two phrases that are the last words of a dying church. One is, we never did it like that before, and the other one is, we've always done it that way. Right? And that would be we've always done it that way. What are you talking about? We can't do that anymore. So the law instead of saying, don't do it because it's just plain wrong, the law says, okay, if you're going to insist on holding to this practice, then here's the way it's going to work out. You're going to have to pay a stupidly high bride price, 50 shekels of silver, and you can never get divorced. So in other words, creating deterrence rather than just helping people understand that it's just plain wrong. With 3,000 years ago, that they wouldn't have understood that. I get that. I still wish God had just said, it's just plain wrong, cut it out. But this, to me, this particular law and coming to an understanding of the law helps me understand this story. Because Jacob grew up in Canaan, so he's familiar with the practice that's out there. Shechem is a Canaanite. He's in that world. So when he sees Dinah and decides he wants to marry her, raping her makes perfect sense to him. But in his culture, just like the law has a kind of thing built into it to, like it's going to be 50 shekels of silver to make sure that someone can't begin to argue for the discount price, they have a cultural practice that matches that. So he goes to his dad and he says, I found a woman I want to marry, Dad, let's go negotiate. And so according to the traditions, it's always this way. He and an older male relative, often his father, in these cultures it's very often your dad, but not always, can be older brother, uncle, something like that. But you go and you negotiate the bride price and the marriage arrangements. And they must negotiate in good faith. So they go to negotiate in good faith. And he says very clearly, ask me what you want, whatever it is. So he doesn't come with a, I should get a discount. It's, hey, we're here to make an honest negotiation. Jacob grew up in Canaan. He knows the practice. None of his children grew up in Canaan. They grew up where Grandpa grew up, in a place called Haran. They did not grow up in Canaan. They don't know that. They're not familiar with the fact that there are people who think that way, who do that. So Jacob is relatively silent, and the brothers, when they come in, they're pretty upset. They're like, they're the ones who do the negotiating. So again, older relatives, right? So it's Dinah's older brothers, particularly Simeon and Levi, who are like Dinah, who are children of Leah. They do the negotiating. And you hear the deal, like you all have to get circumcised. And then they take their swords. And in that point, a couple days later, when all of the men in the city have been circumcised and they are in great pain and not really functioning very well, which means they've probably taken a lot, they're drinking and whatever will dull the pain, so they're not very functional, these two guys sneak in and they slaughter anyone who's a man. They kill them all the males. I think they might have left a few children alive, but they kill them all. Simeon and Levi are bloodthirsty maniacs. I just want to say that. You will hear me say that again about these two guys. They're crazy. They are operating according to a custom, which is called an honor code, which requires blood vengeance. And it's never as simple as, oh, you raped my sister, I must kill you. It's, you raped my sister, I must wipe everyone you know out and obliterate your name from the planet Earth. And by the way, if you want to understand why you'll never have peace in the Middle East, that's why that this honor culture is out there. So, it's like, how many people do you kill on the other side to make up for the number they killed on your side? Well, in the end, it's you wipe them all out. Iran says, and Hamas says, no, Israel must be completely eradicated, eliminated, gone from the planet Earth. Israel's like, we can't help Palestine and their peace as long as there's Hamas. We must eliminate them. We must eradicate them. There's no other possibility in that world. And it's never just one. You can't just kill one. Hamas is operating according to that standard way of thinking. When they go in and they just slaughtered everybody, they didn't care. That's how they thought. That's how these guys are. That's the honor code. It's out there. And at the heart of the honor code is this. Not my poor sister. How is she doing? But how dare you besmirch my honor by raping my sister? Have you noticed how you don't really see a lot of women in Hamas? Have you ever noticed that? Because honor codes are about men's egos. They always have been. My honor has been besmirched. It's about me. It's my sister was raped. Therefore, I must get vengeance for what you did to her, which is really what you did to me, because you have violated my honor. And so these guys act that way. That's why they kill everyone. Their honor has been offended. They don't care about their sister. I mean, if Shechem had come without having followed a local custom practice, if he just showed up and said, hey, I'd really like to talk to you guys about marrying your sister, it would have been a very different conversation. Because it wasn't about Dinah, it was about them. And Jacob himself, you notice, he never speaks up for his daughter in the text. In fact, after his sons go crazy, kill everyone, and then loot the entire place, his response is, oh no, you've made me odious in the land. Everyone's going to hate me and they're going to want to kill me. Oh! In other words, it's all about him. The brothers it's all about them. Oh, we couldn't let this happen to our sister. That's the world that they're in. That's what's going on. If you want to understand the text, you got to have all of that stuff happening, because when you know it, you read it and you go, I see this. But here's my question for you. Who speaks for Dinah? Obviously, I've known lots of people who've been sexually assaulted in various ways at various times in their lives. And so I've heard a lot of stories that have a very similar kind of pattern to them. I said something to somebody once and they didn't believe me, so I've kept it a secret. Or I said something to somebody and then, they asked me why I was there, why I was dressed the way how were you dressed, right? Like it was the victim's fault. I've talked with people who've said, I never said anything to anyone because I thought maybe I had led them on. Right? I've heard this like for my entire career. These are conversations I've had a lot of. And it's taken a long time before our culture has started to go, wait, maybe rape is wrong. I mean, we kind of have a rape culture. We honestly do. A culture that says women are there for men's pleasure. And so men should have access to women. And if a woman says no, she doesn't mean no, she means convince me. Right? And the stuff that men say and do, it can be stunning. I hear people talking about child sexual predators, and I hear all of this stuff. And people will sometimes say, well, we got to be careful about having gay guys teaching high school because, they've got to protect the children. I'm like, what? Hey, if you want, I can give you the profile of a sexual predator, okay? So profiles are generally like you get 60% or something like that when you're doing a criminal profile. You come up with all this different stuff, socioeconomics and junk like that, and you have all these layers of things, Well, the predator, if you ever watch any of those procedural movies or TV shows where they have the FBI profilers, they always have this list of things, probably a person of this age, probably this, probably that. There's this whole list of things they go through. I actually know the profile, which is a 90+% accuracy profile for sexual predators in America today. Ready? Male. That's it. That's the profile. It is relatively rare, not unknown, but relatively rare for women to be sexual predators. It happens. That's why they make the news. But the profile, the actual profile is male. The estimates are that, and so when you talk about sexual assault, you draw lines, you say, well, what constitutes sexual assault? Clearly rape. But, where's the other edge? Where's the boundary edge on the other side? And depending on where you put that boundary, the number of adult women who've been sexually assaulted in their lifetime is somewhere between 25 and 40%, depending on where you draw that line. Guess what? With men, it's about half that number. That means men are sexually assaulted as well. Put 100 men in that room, and there's probably 5 men there who've been raped or otherwise sexually abused in a room of 100. In that same room, there's at least double that women who've been raped, and then you start adding other forms of sexual assault that don't involve penetration, and it just, men and women both. And yes, I've known men and women both victims. And so we come slowly to a place where we begin to speak, where we're willing to, instead of saying, well, why didn't you fight back? Or how were you dressed? Or what were you doing there? I see things about rape prevention. Women shouldn't go places they're not familiar with. They have to be careful not to take drinks from strangers. Make sure you keep track of your drink at all times so someone can't spike it. You should carry a rape whistle, whatever, concealed carry, whatever the thing is, do this, do that, do the other thing. I have a much simpler solution to the problem. Men should just be told, don't rape anyone. Just don't do it. That 100% solution to the problem, don't do it. So we're finally to the point where we don't necessarily blame women for being victims of sexual assault, but we're still expecting them to solve the problem. The problem is in the profile. It starts with, don't do it. Somebody needs to speak up and say that, right? Now you go back into the text. Here's this ancient world where women are regarded almost as property. I mean, to be a woman in ancient times is to be better than a slave, but not a whole lot. You're still a commodity to be traded, to be bought and sold. That's what a marriage is about in many cases. And so I look at this story and I ask myself the question, okay, I understand the history, I understand the culture, I understand what's going on, I can see the conflict, but who's speaking for Dinah? For crying out loud, who's on her side in all of this? And what I find really interesting is that when I'm looking at the text, I realize that the text is telling a story about something that happened that's been pretty accurately remembered. All the details look right. They fit the cultural background, the historical background. They look like they're right, like they're correct. But somewhere in there is a voice that speaks. In the simple telling of a tale that happened, there's a voice that speaks out. A different voice, not the voice of Jacob going, oh, what's this going to mean for me? Not the voice of Dinah's brothers going, our honor has been besmirched. None of those voices. Not the voice of Shechem going, I only raped her because I love her. But a different voice The divine voice, the voice of God, softly, quietly speaking in the very center of the text with these words, "Such a thing ought not be done." God speaks for Dinah. No one else does. In that whole story, no one else speaks for Dinah. God speaks for her. Such a thing ought not be done. It was a young woman had been raped and took her a couple of days before she reported it. She kind of, did that thing. You sort of hold up and just, but then finally she was able to report what happened. They arrested the guy. There was a trial. He was found guilty. It came time for sentencing. And so she wrote a victim statement. I actually helped her a little bit with her victim statement, and just kind of helped her with that process a little. And I said to her, I will be there, and I'll support you when you read your statement. I said, but if you can't read it, I'll read it for you. So we're there, and she starts to read her victim statement. And she gets only a couple lines in, and she can't. And she kind of hands it to me almost without looking, and I take it. I'm a professional reader, right? I read publicly for meaning and clarity. And so I read her statement. I read it. In that terrible, awful moment, I got to be the one who spoke for her, spoke her words, described, put the emphasis where it belonged, made sure the judge heard. And it occurs to me that, for me, that was a gift that came about because of my profession. I know that seems weird, the idea that that was a gift, but I got to do the very thing that's required of us. To be a voice who speaks for those who don't have a voice anymore, to be the one who speaks for Dinah. I got to do that, but that's really all of us. All of our job is that. I just got to be in that moment, to be able to be faithful in that way. But each and every one of us as a Christian is invited, called upon to be the ones to speak for those who do not have the voice. Men and women, children who are victims, but also all of the other voiceless people in this world. When we ask the question, who speaks for them? God's answer to us is, you are my voice. You are the ones to say, such a thing ought not be done. Can you find the prayer of response now? Please stand as we pray together. Who will speak for Dinah, O God? Who will speak for those who have been raped and assaulted, for those who have been told, you shouldn't have been there, shouldn't have dressed like that, shouldn't have allowed this to happen? I will speak for them. I will tell how no one is entitled to take another's body. No one has the right to discount the word no. No one has the privilege of claiming what is not given. I will tell how it is wrong to treat women as playthings, as objects, and not only women. I will speak for boys and girls and men as well who have had their bodies violated. I will speak, Lord Jesus, in your name. Amen. We'd love to have you join us for Sunday worship at 8:30 at the Christ United Methodist Church, or 10:15 at the Stanton United Methodist Church. Until next time, may the Lord God bless you and keep you. May the face of the Almighty be upon you, and may God grant you peace.
When the Lord gets ready, you got to move. Oh, you got to